After going 11-2 in the 13 games prior to the 3-game set against the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Oilers searched but had no answers and were outscored 13-1 in the process. Welcome to the panel presented by Coventry Homes. Tony Brar here alongside Jack Michaels and Bob Stauffer as we are here in the new Nissan model show home in the community of Cybecker, which includes an Edmonton Oilers fan cave like you've never seen before. Just terrific stuff. You, of course, can come on over and tour the home yourself or take part in a virtual tour available on the website. So what's fitting here, gentlemen, is that we are in a beautiful show home by Coventry Homes amidst the Oilers' longest homestand, 7-game homestand. But Jack, the Oilers not getting off to the start they wanted, dropping 3 straight to the Leafs.
No, and I'm not so much sure that it was the Oilers not getting off to a start. I don't think they were allowed out of the blocks. I think Toronto did as good a job as I've seen any team do, certainly for any sort of extended period of time, on Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. I mean, their defense was impregnable. I'm not sure Edmonton could have done a whole lot more. And I come out of this series thinking, you know what? The other team wants to win as well, and sometimes the other team is just better.
Yeah.
Edmonton got outplayed. Did the Oilers play their best? No.
Yeah.
But I think as much of that belongs in the credit column for Toronto as the blame department for Edmonton. I'm not going to overreact to this. I'm going to choose to look at the 3 or 4 weeks leading up to this series where Edmonton had won 11-13. I don't think you can just chuck that in the receptacle because of 3 straight losses to arguably the best team in the league, let alone the division.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You talk about not reacting, and that's one thing that I have some confidence in is just the maturity and the experience that Ken Holland and Dave Tippett and the tone that Dave Tippett has. I mean, the fans, obviously, you know, you're living and dying with every game. And for the players, it was a hard lesson. And it perhaps showed, Jack, a little bit of the delineation between where Toronto's at right now and where Edmonton's at right now. But
that's the key point right there.
Right.
This is not May.
Right.
This is not the 4-game blip that ultimately cost Edmonton, you know, an appearance in the, 16-team bracket. I mean, Bob, back in August, they had a bad week and season over.
And we had people overreact to that as well,
right.
May I add. Like we had, like I've talked to I've talked to guys that were up for general managers positions in the last 2 weeks. And they're like, Bob, our team, the one thing we told our pro scouts was do not overreact to a team that had a tough week in August and got knocked out in the first round, which, by the way, included the Toronto Maple Leafs in terms of evaluating players. And it seems a little bit trite for fans that, they've stayed with the Oilers for the last several years, but this is a better team. Yeah. But they played a team in Toronto that was on their game, that has got a great top 4 defense right now. That's, and they're just a little bit ahead of Edmonton in terms of the curve of where they're at right now. And it doesn't mean that Edmonton can't have a better showing when they go to Toronto later in the season. So you know what? You got kicked in the teeth.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
Learn from it. And let's continue to watch the progression and growth. And remember that the Oilers are going to have some flexibility. They might even make an organic addition at some point later in the season that might change the complexion of their forwards.
Dylan Holloway. And they've got a couple guys, I think you're going to see Evan Bouchard start to play a little bit more here and learn from what undermined, your chance for success against Toronto.
Yeah.
But don't necessarily lose confidence, as Jack mentioned, in what you accomplished prior to those 3 games.
And the point is, though, it's not like the week in August where it costs you the season. Yeah. Right. I mean, you can not overreact to it, Bob, but it did cost the Oilers a good season.
They're still above 500. They're still above 500.
And they're not only above 500, they're still, in a position, even Dave Tippett, leading into the series. Remember what he said about the series against Toronto? Well, you know what? We're just looking to get in the playoffs. We're not so concerned with where we finish. Yeah. He's been asked about that top spot, the importance of claiming the top spot. And even Dave Tippett's thinking it's not about that. It's just getting into the tournament and then seeing where the chips fall. So even the 2 games in Toronto later this year, you know what? If the Oilers go in there and they blow out Toronto, it won't mean that all of a sudden the tables have turned. Ultimately, the only thing that matters to both of these teams, it should be said both these teams. Toronto's had 3 straight trips and 3 straight first-round exits. The key for Edmonton is and Toronto is not what they accomplish in March or April. It's what they're able to accomplish in May and moving forward. So that's where I think Bob is saying, look, let's look at the 60 to 90 day picture.
Yeah.
Let's not get caught up in what happened this past week, because unlike what happened in August, the season isn't over.
So, Bob, you used the word kick in the teeth. Jack, you used the word lesson. How much of a lesson can a lesson like this, or sorry, how much value can a lesson like this kind of help this Oilers team grow, because they are still young at the core?
You know, I can recall all the way back, and I'm not comparing this current team to the halcyon days of the Oilers of the 80s. Edmonton went into Hartford in the 1983-84 season. They didn't have Wayne Gretzky, but they lost 11-0. Okay, I remember listening to that game with Rod Phillips, who I later had the privilege of working with, and thinking, oh man, I'm not sure they're ever going to win. And you know what? They took the Islanders apart in the final 3 games of the Stanley Cup final in 1984. So there is an example of how, and that was like a February loss, if I recall. It might have even been a March loss that year. You know what? There's 2 lives you live. There's the life you learn with, and then the life you live after you learn. And so I kind of, I know the caliber of the Oilers' top end players.
More recently, look at Tampa, beginning of last year. Slow out of the gate, as the window passed them by. That's what we heard in the first month.
Especially after the Columbus sweep as well.
And that's why I thought that the concentration from a couple guys targeting, Draisaitl and McDavid, or McDavid and Draisaitl, their defenses. In that series, the Tampa lost to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Nikita Kucherov was the league MVP. They had Braden Point and they had Stamkos. That was their top line. They had 5 points combined in 4 games. And they had won 60 games that year, and they lost to Columbus in 4. The Oilers lost the best of 5 to Chicago, where McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins combined for over 20 points, and it still wasn't good enough for some people out there. The Oilers are an unfinished product. That's what we saw against Toronto. We know that. The players aren't stupid. They know that as well. They're the first ones to. They know in that room right now that they have made a step from where they're at when they concluded last year, and they also know that there'll be continued growth with this group carrying forward. So the lesson, it was a tough one, it was a bitter one, it was a frustrating one, but they got to get back and focused and ready to go, and not allow that negative energy to seep into their game against Calgary. You know what? Because of Dave Tippett's even keel, Jack, I don't know what you think about this, but I think that's a key.
Yeah, how much is that an asset, Jack?
Well, it is an asset. I'm going to first off say I don't think we can get into the young core right now. That's not, I don't think the Oilers want to hear that, and I'm not sure I'd agree with that. I don't think their core might be young in chronological years, but it's maturing.
Oh, they're definitely maturing.
There's no excuses to be. I don't think Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Darnell Nurse are going to want to hear, if it doesn't work out this year, they're not going to want to hear, well, they were too young and inexperienced.
Okay.
That I'm going to chuck that out. I'm going to build a little bit on what Bob said, because the one thing I will say, and you don't want to get caught up in the negative energy, but Dave Tippett did make a telling comment last night. No, we're not forgetting it. We're not parking it, because we need to find the competitive level that we just ran into, because we're going to see that competitive level again. And I thought that was a telling comment, because he's saying, you know what, you better learn, because as well as they played this week, they're going to be even tougher in late May. And we better be ready for it, because if we're not ready for it, it's going to be the same result, and we're going to be out quicker. That's what he left unsaid. But I thought it was very important that he said it. Look, we're not just, we're not going to forget about it. We're not going to burn the tape. We remember this, and we remember the level we need to be at. We weren't at it now, and that's where it's important.
See, what happened is they never gained control of any of the 3 games at any point, because Toronto didn't let them, right? And then they had a little bit, my point about the energy, they had negative energy come in. They couldn't buy a break. They couldn't buy a call. They maybe didn't earn a call in a couple of those games. But when they played at Calgary, with all due respect to Calgary, that's a different team that they're playing. And so they can't sit there and you learn from it, but you also sit there and go, okay, even if they get down 1-0 in the game against Calgary, it's not here we go again.
No.
It's dig yourself out of it.
Well, so part of it is playing Calgary. Part of it is you're playing Vancouver. I mean, the Oilers rallied from 3-0 down. I was saying, well, they've been here before. But the other half of that statement is, let's be honest. Toronto is at a different level. Playing the Vancouver Canucks or the Calgary Flames is not the same right now as playing the Toronto Maple Leafs. We just saw that. The opponent matters. Like we talked about at the beginning, the opponent matters because they want to win too. And when the opponent is good, you better bring it, or what happened this week can happen.
Let's get one more thing here. Toronto's already had a complete fall apart game. They're up 5-1 at home against Ottawa and allowed the Ottawa Senators, who are coming on, by the way. Yeah. I mean, they outscored Calgary 14-8 in 3 games going into the game tonight. I mean, they're coming on, but they allowed that team to come back and beat them 6-5. So they've had that experience of blowing a big lead during the course of the game, and they locked her down. That was the most disciplined we have seen Toronto play. And people forget this. Back to the Maple Leafs, you mentioned the fact 3 first-round exits against pretty good teams, Washington and Boston. The last 2 years, if Nazem Kadri stays in those series, he doesn't. Like guys like Marner and Matthews showed up. And so, I'm going to be intrigued to see where Edmonton can go as the season goes on. They've obviously got to tighten up a little bit defensively. Yeah, there was too many. You know what? They got forced a bit and puked up too many pucks during the course of games and gave Toronto some second chance opportunities. They got to do a little bit better job. They didn't have the same sort of puck support from their forwards that Toronto did. Toronto did a great job, sort of layering specifically against Connor McDavid, not as much against Leon Draisaitl. But again, you learn from those things. And you also build. And I don't think Dave Tippett and Ken Holland are done building. And I think we'll see that come to fruition as the season goes on.
I think what's important in this 4th edition of the Battle of Alberta is the Oilers actually get on the board early. So when you talk about, okay, it's not here we go again, there's actually backed up by the facts. The Oilers are 6-0 on home ice when they score first. They're 0-8 when they allow the first goal. So I think that first goal is pivotal. Do you agree, Jack? And it seems to be a more prominent this year with the intra-division play because you're only playing divisional opponents. So when you score first, maybe.
Yeah, I know where you're going, Tony. And to some degree, I echo your sentiments. But again, I go right back to the opponent. I think if they get
especially with the way Calgary's trending right now, too.
Well, it's just the rest of the division. Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't think going down 1-0 to Calgary or even Winnipeg or Vancouver is the same as going down to 1-0 Toronto, not the way they played in that series. Yeah. Bob talked about, the layering of defense against Connor McDavid. And, let's face it, in a 5-1 game last night in the 3rd period, Bob and I started paying close attention to what Toronto did, even in quote unquote garbage time. And no matter whether McDavid was out there with a Yamamoto or whether he was just, skating out there, as you saw, the lines were changed up quite a bit last night, and he got different looks. But no matter when he was out there, they were rolling 2 guys straight at him every time. Every time. Yeah. 2 guys were going toward him.
You're not beating us.
Exactly. Make someone else beat you. And Bob's point about Leon Draisaitl, look, Toronto's no fool. They're probably under the distinct impression that Leon Draisaitl may be somewhat physically compromised and maybe somewhat kind of grinding it out right now, not at 100%. So again, you go after that speed of Connor McDavid, force him to either give up the puck or take the puck from him. I'll give TJ Brody in particular a lot of credit. Active sticks, they got in Connor McDavid's grill. Very good. That's as well as you can defend. Yeah. And they played it over 3 games. But again, it's early March, not early May. Edmonton's got 60 days to figure it out, beginning with the Battle of Alberta. Back to your point, Tony, I don't think it's the same, falling 1-0 down to Calgary. The Oilers swept them last time. They have a lot of confidence against every other team in the division. Right now, were they to get down in a 4th game to Toronto 1-0, it might have an impact. I don't think it's going to have an impact. Okay. Now, the records obviously would tell you otherwise, but I'm just saying, I feel like Edmonton is still, based on what I've seen, the 2nd best team in the division. That may sound ludicrous in the aftermath of this 3-game series. Yeah. But that's where I see the North Division delineated right now. Yeah. There's Toronto, and quite frankly, there's a notch below.
And let's look at the season as a whole. You guys mentioned it earlier on. Well, there's still 14-11. Bob, Dave Tippett has a little bit of a good problem. He has to make a lot of decisions come game night because he has a lot of different options, especially on the back end. How encouraging is that?
Well, they need their guys to play better. There's some guys against Toronto last night that had a real tough game, and I think there's going to be changes. I'd be stunned if Evan Bouchard's not back in the game, and I'd be stunned if he's not playing right defense. So we'll start there. There are some options. Chason was starting to come on a bit, got involved in got suspended for the game. I think he obviously comes back in as well. But not surprised. I wonder whether or not the Oilers look at going 11-7 against Calgary on Saturday
So
night.
they play Bear and go with 7D. Because if you're saying that Bouchard's back in, I don't see him taking out Barry or Larson.
What if they play Lagesson and Bear? Or sorry, Lagesson and Bouchard. And
Well, if William Lagesson's ready, that's
Yeah,
the
he's
key.
he's still
and
on
this
IR.
is this is one, like, sometimes you like, I heard for 2 years Stoff, William Lagesson, there's something there with the player. And first couple games we saw him in the NHL, he looked in like, wow, this is a step up for him. That was last season, but he looked like a different player this year when he's played and played very well. I feel bad for a guy like Adam Larson because I thought Adam Larson actually played pretty well and was very competitive. The Oilers were physical against some of Toronto's better players, specifically last night.
John Tavares took a beating
so it
last
wasn't,
night.
but there were a couple younger defensemen that had some challenges against the Leafs, and one or two of those guys might end up coming out, and we might end up seeing. I think we'll see Bouchard in, and it's just going to be hell for Lagesson up front. I wonder, whether or not Nugent Hopkins actually ends up back with Connor on Saturday night, and then they reabridge what they do with Leon. So, Jack, I'll say this: I think Edmonton's a playoff team. I think Winnipeg's got a really good goaltender. They've now got strength down the middle, and I think that gives them an advantage on a team like Montreal right now, just because they're better at center. But the Oilers have great centers too. The Oilers have 2 Hart Trophy winners at center.
Well, and Montreal's a bit unsettled. I mean, their head coach has just been fired, and their number one goalie, and what many Canadians would tell you is the number one goalie in the world, is playing like an 880 goaltender right now. So they're a little unsettled. I would just say Winnipeg's back end. If I'm Paul Maurice, I feel like Edmonton's got more depth on the back end. Again, I don't think you can chuck out what Edmonton's. I mean, they're 12-6 against the rest of the division. Now they've split with Winnipeg. I think Winnipeg's right there. I'm not going to sit here and say Edmonton's a clear notch above Winnipeg. In fact, Winnipeg's got a better winning percentage. But I'm just saying, because you get beat 3 straight by Toronto, even as badly as you were beaten, you have to concede that sometimes you're going to catch a really good team playing really good hockey.
And that is what happened. And I think for the Oilers, you know what? Don't get too high, don't get too low. And that's I'm going to circle back to Ken Holland and Dave Tippett.
Yeah.
Like, that has been the modus operandi with Dave since day one here. And then grind your way to improve. And that's what the best people do in every facet in life, is they have tenacity in what they do. Connor McDavid is the player that he is because of how hard he works. Leon Draisaitl has surpassed the expectations of virtually every expert in the world when it comes to evaluating player talent, because he never stopped working. That's why you don't bet against Darnell Nurse, because of how hard he works. That's why he's become a legitimate top 2 NHL defenseman. And he is a legitimate top 2 NHL defenseman, is because of his relentless work ethic. And I think that the Oilers, I'm fairly confident that they're going to continue to grow and improve as the season goes on, because I think that they've got people in place and they've got a leadership core that's maturing that believes in some of those characteristics.
Yeah, you guys keep talking about the even-keeled demeanor of Dave Tippett. He talked about the word recognize. And really quickly, I want to recognize someone in the prospect pool that you guys already mentioned, Dylan Holloway. Let's speak about the start that he's had with the University of Wisconsin, nearly tripling his points per game production from last season already. Bob, Jack, tremendous start for Dylan.
Yeah, the seeds were planted a little bit in the second half of last year. They really worked him in slowly in the first 3 or 4 months. I had an opportunity to speak with a couple people on Wisconsin staff. I know Bob just talked to Tony Granato, but last year they could see him coming. Now, did they see him doing what he's doing this year? No, I don't think anyone did, present company included. But what Bob indicates is a real option, because, when he talks about, again, with all the quarantine situations and with the lack of cap space readily available to Ken Holland for as long as he's had the job, if you can bring in an internal player like Dylan Holloway, that could be a huge add. Now, I don't know what the transition will be from NCAA to the NHL. I'm not going to say expect to see Dylan Holloway as a stone cold mortal lock top 6 player. He's going to light it up, and the Oilers are just going to, get to the next level. But what I can tell you is he's playing with some great players at Wisconsin. He's not even playing on the same line as another, top 15 pick in Cole Caulfield. and he's still putting up the numbers he's putting up at the University of Wisconsin. They're not even playing together.
Yeah.
So it's not like you could say he's got Caulfield as a crutch, or the other way around. I mean, Caulfield's a hell of a prospect too. So it's an exciting prospect, and one that I think adds an element of intrigue to the Oilers moving down the stretch.
There's only two, like right now, I think he's averaging 1.83 points per game. That would be the highest. The only players that have been above that over the last 6 or 7 years in the NCAA, maybe let's go 8 or 9 years, have been Johnny Gaudreau and Jack Eichel. And I don't think he's going to be that level of productivity at the NHL level. Make no mistake. I mean, Seth Jarvis went one pick before. He's leading the American Hockey League in scoring before he goes back to junior. So that was an exciting prospect, a guy that could score and had some bite in his game. I personally didn't see this type. I mean, how could you have seen 10 multiple point games in a 12-game stretch?
Incredible.
When he's not playing with Cole Caulfield, right? And actually, if you take a look at the scoring for Wisconsin, he's playing, Caulfield's playing with the second and third, the best forwards other than Holloway and Caulfield. I think but what he's got is he's got an NHL body and he can skate and he's competitive. And that's why I think he's got and remember, last year he played left wing. Now they've morphed him into a center this year. I could see him coming into, I think the Oilers' second/third line left wing. They got options there, but they don't have an option like Holloway at that sort of speed, at that size. So I'm intrigued about the possibilities of him maybe coming in, and I know that people say, well, that's not how Ken Holland does things. Well, guess what? It's a different time. You got to have productivity from entry-level players. And people say, well, you can't afford to sign him now and burn a year. Why? Why wait? If you got a chance to make your team better. So I'm going to be really intrigued to see how the Oilers handle this. Brian Lawton, who we have on the show, Jack, represented players like that all the time. And he's like, Bob, I'm telling you point blank, he can step in and play in the NHL and help the Oilers. That's good enough for me. Tony Granato was very diplomatic. And when I asked him when's the right time for a player, but I think
he was measured. But
I think he knows deep down inside, what does the guy have to prove if he's putting up almost 2 points per game in NCAA? He's ready for the next step.
Well, we're definitely looking a little long-term, if you will, with this panel here. But in the short term, the Oilers...
It's a heck of a lot more fun than looking short-term. I mean, let's be honest. Toronto took care of business. But again, there's 60 days to go. And you know what, Tony? The other thing is we'd be saying the same thing. If the Oilers had taken care of Toronto 3 in a row, I don't think we'd be sitting here saying, all right, who's their semifinal opponent, in the Stanley Cup semis. You can't fast forward. It is, even though it's not the same kind of marathon it usually is, 56 games isn't exactly a sprint either. There's work to be done. Definitely. As Dave Tippett always says, you got to take it one game at a time, as they're focused on game number 26 on the schedule, the 4th edition of the Battle of Alberta. This has been the panel presented by Coventry Homes. For Jack and Bob, I'm Tony Barr signing off.